So we're going to be finishing up with our elections and political participation mini lectures, and we're going to have 2 of these. And we finish here because you really can't fully understand how people participate until you understand the institutions and the ways in which they can participate. And so that's why in this class what we focused on has been the institutions inside and outside of government that impacts the governing process and impacts the political process. And so here we're going to kind of come to the penultimate, which is our ability to participate and the ability of normal persons to participate in the process. And this is really cool. I mean, this is what makes our system, at least originally, unique, and even today, the ways we do it unique. And what we want to kind of go through in this first mini lecture is going to be the 4 features of the United States election law. And we really want to focus on who is running and how do those and who gets to participate, right? So who's participating in the election? How? What's the manner? What kinds of things do they do in order to participate? And where and in what way do they participate? So let's take a look at each of these one in turn. And we're going to begin by taking a look at the who, or the electoral composition. That is suffrage. And what we're going to see is that the electorate has slowly but surely grown over time. And what this means is that more and more people have been eligible to participate in the electoral process. And some of our major amendments in the Constitution deal specifically with this. Now, for instance, the 15th Amendment in 1870s will give African American men the right to vote. It won't be until 1920, with the 19th Amendment, that women get the right to vote. And finally, not all the way until 1971 with the 26th Amendment, when 18-year-olds will be given the right to vote. Now, what this kind of shows is that, again, slowly but surely, the number of people who have been eligible has increased and can participate. Now, I do want to focus and say that while technically in the constitutional amendment, especially for African American men, that as early as 1870 they have the right to vote per se, but there will be a number of barriers to African American voting, and one of the big of these will be literacy tests, and I want to just kind of give you a little bit of it. And this, just to give you an idea, is the literacy test from 1965, not that long ago. And let's just kind of play along and see how many of these you could get right without Googling it, and kind of see what you think about some of these questions. These are all from the 1965 Alabama literacy test. Which of the following is a right guaranteed by the Bill of Rights? Pick all that apply. Public education, employment, trial by jury, voting. And the answer? Well, pause. Well, did you get it? Maybe. Let's take a look. And that is going to be number 3. Trial by jury. The only one on the list. The only one guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. Well, so far, not bad. Let's take a look at our next one. The federal census of population is taken every 5 years. True or false? Pause. Tell me what you think. What did you answer? The correct answer is false. It is taken every 10 years. You should know that from this class, as a matter of fact. Let's take a look at something a little bit more difficult. A president elected at the general election in November takes office the following year on what date? Pause and see if you can answer. What did you get? The answer is actually January 20. Yeah. Huh. See the things you're learning already? Let's take a look at a couple more. Here's one that's a little bit more difficult, one from the harder sections of the test. Does enumeration affect the income tax levied on citizens in various states? And no, you can't Google the word enumeration. Let's pause. And the answer? Yes. Because of the 16th Amendment. You did that right. Anyway, of the original 13 states, the one with the largest representation in the first Congress was? What did you answer? The correct answer is Virginia. Now, I just want to point out here that I haven't even given you, I'm not going to give you all the questions, and I'm not even giving you the hardest questions, just a few. So, just let's play along. One more. Check the offenses which, if you are convicted of them, disqualify you for voting. And lots of students ask, yes, it's the same today as it would have been in 1965. Which of the following did you check? Well, the answer is there's only one. Murder. Murder is the only felony here. Oopsie. And that's the only kind of thing that can bar you from voting. So, how well did you do? My guess is you may or may not have done so well. And the answer is we might think, well, who could pass this test? As a matter of fact, there's lots more questions on it. I'm just giving you a sampling. And the answer is, anybody know where a grandfather clause comes from? Well, it actually comes from this. A grandfather clause said if your grandfather could vote, then you didn't have to take a literacy test. But whose grandfathers couldn't vote in 65? Well, you know, the ones who had been, that's right, slaves. So, literacy tests, poll taxes, and a number of other barriers were still remaining deep into the modern era to prevent African Americans from voting, especially in the South and the Deep South. Although don't think that this was just an issue of the South. The North had its own and continues to have its own racism issues. So, in general, though, the WHO has increased over time, although here on this point of ethnicity, it probably hasn't increased the way it was intended or should have. But that's just part of the question. That was the first of the WHO. So the WHO has moved from a few individuals, comparatively speaking, to what we can today call universal suffrage. Universal suffrage means everyone has the opportunity to vote. But how do we vote? Another interesting, important question. And the answer is that voting has never been the same. As a matter of fact, in the first 100 years of the existence of the United States, you would probably not be familiar at all with the way that individuals would have voted. In the first 100 years, there was no secrecy. If there even were ballots, not all of the candidates would have been on the ballot. As a matter of fact, in many localities, in many locations, individuals might have even come out and said, okay, everybody who's for Bill, come on, stand over on the left side of the room. Everybody who's for John, stand over on the right side of the room. And it will not be until you get to the 1880s that you begin to see individuals vote differently. Prior to the 1880s, people voted in public meetings that weren't secret. They voted by ballots printed by the parties themselves or by individuals. There was no what we think of as being kind of ballot consistency. And so you get all kinds of interesting examples of ballots. Today, we vote using the Australian ballot. I know, weird, huh? The Australian ballot is a ballot that has everyone on the ticket. It's provided by the state itself. And your vote is preserved via secrecy. And that's not going to happen, as you can see. The big change doesn't happen in the 1880s, and it doesn't fully make the whole form until 1900. So, relatively historically recently. Now, what about where and what? We've already talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to rehash all of it, but I want to give a new spin to it a little bit. And what we're going to see is that today, both House and Senate members are elected, and we know we've talked about this, in single-member districts, right? It's the districts we've already talked about for the House, and obviously senators, two per state. But they're obviously staggered. So what's new here? And the answer is we haven't talked about this. FPTP is the electoral rules that we use in the United States, and that stands for first past the post. First past the post. And it means that the highest vote getter wins, even if they don't have a majority. So if you had 4 people running, someone could win with 26% of the vote, right? So they'd have the most votes, they'd be the highest vote getter, but they would not have a majority of the votes. And one of the things that we're going to see is that because both the House and Senate today are popularly elected by first past the post rules, one of the things we know is that electoral rules can predict how many parties there are going to be. So if you wondered why we always ended up with 2 parties, we talked about political parties in the last section, the answer is first past the post. In first past the post majority rules, you end up with 2 major political parties. Just about always. We even have a name for it, Duvier's law, although you don't have to memorize that one. First past the post results in 2 major political parties, or Duvier's law. Now, we kind of have a feeling about who and where and when people are voting, but we want to kind of ask then, who is it that votes? And that's actually a bigger question than it sounds, because voting is actually one subtype of a larger question of participation. And the question we're going to look at is twofold. One, who participates? And then as a sub-part of this question, we're going to want to know who votes. So what is political participation? Political participation is individuals getting involved in the political process, meaning they're voting, they're campaigning, they're contributing, they're making informal or formal contact with officials. And one of the great puzzles in political science is who will actually engage in these kinds of activities and who will not engage in those activities. And what we'll see is there's kind of 2 key elements to the equation. People have to have motivation and they have to have capacity. Motivation is the desire to be active. Motivation is the desire to be active. It means that you want to vote, campaign, contribute. So of course there's going to be some people who, for whatever reason, don't want to be involved. But what about among the people who want to be involved? Because even among just those people, some will and some won't. And that leads us to capacity. Capacity is the ability to be active. So maybe I want to participate in the political process, but I'm going to need to have the time, the money, the verbal skills, the ability to then accurately participate. And 3 real famous political scientists are actually going to set up a model of understanding this. It's called the Civic volunteerism model. And they say, look, you can't really change much about motivation. People are going to want to do it or not going to want to do it. But what about capacity? And they said, look, there's really 3 basic categories of resources that are necessary. And Verba, Schlossman, and Brady are going to set these out. And they're going to say, look, what's going to happen is we look at how resources are distributed, we're going to see who's going to participate more. And resources then will be the predictor of how often people will participate. And they're going to look at time, money, and skills. And what they're going to end up with is going to say, look, the more money you have, the more likely you are to be active. The more time you have, the more likely you'll be active. So, for instance, if I'm an hourly worker versus a wage worker, my ability to take an hour off and go vote might be different than if I have to actually take time off and lose funds to go vote. And then as your skills increase, your ability to understand the political process. And the one that's the most malleable, obviously, is skills. You can say, hey, I'd like more money and I'd like more time. I mean, everybody's saying that. But really, the easily malleable one is skills, which involve things like education, which you're doing by taking classes like mine, or your participation in other non-political organizations, such as churches and the workplace, increase your ability to be involved. So understanding and being adept at the system increases your likelihood of participation. So what are the rates of involvement for people generally? And let's take a look at presidential turnout rates. Presidential turnout rates, this is from 1944 through 2016. And what we're going to see is that over time, turnout rates have been relatively low. Now, just so you're wondering here, there's different ways of calculating turnout rates, and that's where these two different lines are coming from here. And the basic deal is you can take a look at registered voters, you can take a look at the whole population, estimations of the whole population. We're not going to go into that in this kind of intro class. But if you take a look at this through time, we're on average, we've seen over 60% of people coming involved, and a couple of times dipping as low as under 50% at some points, higher as 60% at some points, but the average being around about half of people are participating at any given moment in time. And this is in presidential races. If you take a look at midterms, like for instance the 2014 midterm, only 33.9% of people turned out. That's a really low number. Now, what makes voting unique? And there's a lot of questions about why people end up turning out. We're not going to go into all of them here, although you're going to read about them in the textbook. But what we are going to need to talk about a little bit is what makes this voting participation unique. As I said, voting is one subset of political participation. And voting is unique for a number of reasons. For one, it can't be multiplied in volume. So, someone who can give the max contribution to a candidate and a person who can't, well, somebody's going to have a lot more political participation possible because they're more interested or they have more money. But in the voting, right, my vote will count the same as a millionaire's as will count a homeless person's vote. And so as a result, it can't be multiplied in. The second is that it contains no detailed information. Right, so, if I send a letter to someone or interact with a politician directly, they're going to know why it is I'm interacting, potentially. But my vote could mean all kinds of things. It could mean I am in favor of their positions. It could mean that I just hate the other guy. It could mean I flipped a coin. It could mean a number of things. We don't know. The vote just says this person, that person. The third is that it's equalized across people. So regardless of who you are, you're going to have a single vote. And so this makes voting very much more unique than other types of political participation. Now we're going to stop here and when we come back in the next mini lecture, we're going to take a look at the things that affect voting. But for now, let's pause.